Hello and welcome to another tutorial from Plugins 4D. Today we're going to be looking at the material view in 4D Paint. So up under the Plugins 4D menu, you've got the material view. Now this is useful for working with multiple materials over a single polygonal object, but it also is useful if you've just got a single material as well. I'm going to create a sphere here, make it editable, and then we can see all the polygons for that. Now there's no material currently on this object. This is just a default view here so we can see the UVs. To create a material, we can come up and we can go to Standard Material and click Create Single Material. And this is going to create a standard C4D material and put a texture in the color channel. I'm just going to show that here under the layer view. We have a material and it's called Sphere UV0. It takes the name from the object and it's got a color channel and it's got a single image in the background called the background layer. Now let's look at the material here. So you can see there we've got the material, got the color channel, and we've got an image, and it's called Sphere UV0 color. Now these textures, they get added at the size that's defined in the preferences. So under the preferences, you'll see a section called 4D Paint. If you are on R17, R18, or 19, this will be 4D Publish. Everything in the previous versions is all under a 4D Publish menu, but from R20 onwards, we've split them out into different sections. So here you'll see a default width and a default height. That's 2K by 2K, and the format is TIFF. And that is what has been created here. It's a 2K by 2K TIFF. We'll go over some of these other options later on as well. Now, if you want to add more channels, you can do so simply from up here. If you wanted to add a bump, you just click bump, and it'll automatically add the bump channel with the color, with the image in there, and it'll have the name underscore bump at the end. We've got a number of these in here. We don't currently support the reflection channels in here, but everything else is supported. Now, if you wanted to right now, you could have this selected, and you could choose one of the paint brushes, and you could just start painting on your model. But instead, we're going to continue going over all the features of this material view and what it can do for you. Okay, so we've got the color selected here on this background layer, and I'm going to switch to the painting tab, and you'll actually see that will be what's displayed in here. Now to actually make this a bit more visible, I'm going to put a texture on here. Now to do that, I'm going to use the content view. So I've just brought up the content view here. Now this content view displays all of the textures from your libraries, as well as stamps and stencils. Now if you don't want to view all the textures from all of the default libraries, you can actually disable that from the preferences. So under here, if you uncheck Scan C4D Content Libraries, then it won't bring up all the ones from the content browser, Body Paint, Broadcast, Prime, Sculpt. These are because I have the Studio Edition, so I have all of these libraries. And also, if you don't want it to scan your user libraries, you can uncheck that. But then you'll just be left with stamps and stencils. So now I just want to put an image into here. So I'm just going to grab any of these images. I'll grab this eye looking one, just drop it on there. What that does is it resamples it so that it takes up the full 2K by 2K size of that texture map. And I'm also going to put something just in the bump there. So I'll select the bump there and drag that onto the bump. So now we've filled out the bump channel. So let's just make things a little bit more interesting when we're looking at this. So if I switch to that painting tab, you'll see that we're looking at the eye there. Glow background, we'll see we've got the background. Now one thing you might want to do is add a layer over all of your channels, over all your materials. Now we've only got one material on this sphere at the moment, and I actually want to make this two materials. So I'm going to do that by actually extracting this texture out into another material. So if I select the polygon tool here, I can actually click and start dragging and drawing in here to select UVs. Now this is not a great workflow yet for selecting UVs. Another way you can actually do it is just directly in the viewport. But we will be adding extra tools to select UVs later on. So I'm just going to go rectangle selection by just dragging in the viewport and selecting there. So now I've got roughly half of these. And I'm going to right click here and I'm going to choose New Material Scale UVs. What that's going to do is it's going to create a brand new material, and it's actually going to scale out the UVs. Now you may not want it to scale these UVs. Some people want to keep it exactly as it is. So let me just click undo. And instead of doing that scale UVs, I'm going to do it another way. I'm going to use new material, no scale. And this is extracted out, but it hasn't scaled it out. So now we've got a new material, but it hasn't scaled it out. So now we have two materials on our object. And they're looking a bit funny at the moment, so I'm going to actually just fill these. So I'm going to come up to layers, and on this channel here, for color, I'm going to come up and go fill current layer. And it's filled all of the background layers. And it's filled them white. Now you may be wondering where that white color came from. Well, that's actually from the brushes. So if you have the brushes selected, you can choose your color here. And this is actually the body paint color as well, if you had switched over to the body paint interface for the main brush. So here I can now go layers, fill current layer, and it's going to fill it blue. Now you may not want to fill everything. You may want to just fill selected UVs. So you can do that. We can come up here and let's just select these. I can select them in the viewport there, or in this viewport I can actually just double click and it'll select all the UVs. You can also alt click, alt single click to select all the UVs, and you can shift click and control click to remove and add. So it's shift clicking, control clicking, alt clicking. So now we have just those selected, and I want to fill just those. So you can do that by coming up and going here and going fill current layer UVs, and it will fill those. Or you can just right click in here and go flood fill. Now you can also do it across these as well. So let me just grab the selection tool and drag an area across. Now we got selected on both. And if I go up here and go fill current layer UVs, it's going to fill all those selected ones with green. But if we've got multiple selected here and we just want to fill on a single material, we just right click in the one we want and go flood fill. It's just going to do the one that you want. So again, using that is going to do both. The right click just works in the one you've got your mouse over. Now you might notice that there might be some seams on your model. So if you do see any seams, to fix those, there's an option in here. You just go right click and you go bleed. Now it's going to bleed out just that texture. So you can see there the UVs bled out just past the UV area. And we can do the other one as well. Or we can do them all at the same time. So we've got our layers over here, select the background layers. And if I go right click and go bleed active layers, it's going to bleed both of these. We've got all these layers actually active. You can also come up to layer, you can go bleed all. That's going to bleed every layer on every material. So I click that, it's going to go through and bleed everything. Now you might want to actually add a layer over both these materials. Let's say you want to add a dirt layer. If you come up to layers and then you come down to add layer to all materials, let's call it dirt. It's added a dirt layer to both of the materials. If you wanted to do one for the bump, you just select the channel in the bump and you can add a layer in here, bump dirt, and you'll add a bump dirt layer to all of your materials on the bump channel. These work with the name, so the names need to be important. When you select this dirt layer, it also selects the dirt layer on every material. Now, it's not really visible in here how that is happening. So, but one thing you can do is actually just switch over to this global tab on the layer view. And now you can just work just in this view here, since you have a color channel and a bump channel over all your materials. And the color channel has a dirt layer on every material on that channel, and also has a background layer. So with the color selected, you're now painting on the color channel, and with the bump, you're painting on the bump channel if you were to do any painting in the viewport. And from here, you can also change you can switch these layers on and off. So I'm just going to drag another image on there from my content browser so we can actually see something happening there. Actually, no, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to invert the selection. I'll just select something else. Let me just select these here, just so we see something different. And I'm going to change the color of my paint to red, and I'm going to flood fill those. So you can see we've got the red there on the dirt layer. Now if I turn the dirt layer on and off, you'll see that turns that layer on and off. But it's not just turning it off on this material, it's turning it off on all materials. So let me do a selection over here as well. And I'm going to fill that. And if I turn the dirt layer on and off, you'll see in the background there that the dirt layer is turning on and off. And also it's turning on and off here as well. Now if you don't want to see the composited version, you can actually turn off composite, and you're just going to see the one you got selected. So that's the background layer and that's the dirt layer. That's all you'll be seeing in here. And you can also turn off the UVs as well if you don't want to look at the UVs. And also tell you what layer you've got selected, the dirt layer, and what channel you're currently on, the color layer. If you change the opacity of these, so I'll come up here and I change the opacity down, you notice it changes the opacity on both layers. This is not visualized in this system here, but it does show it on the materials in the background. And from here you can also change the layer type. So currently it's normal, but you can use all the different body paint types there to change the effect of that layer. So we have a few other options up under the layers menu here. One is create wireframe layer. Now that's going to create a wireframe for every single color channel. So you can see that it created a wireframe layer. Now I'm going to turn off the UVs here. Now unfortunately, the sampling resolution of this preview is not able to show the wireframe, but the wireframe is actually on the mesh as its own layer. So if I just zoom right in, you'll see there it's like a 1 pixel wireframe. So if you were to send this to Photoshop, then you would have your 1 pixel wireframe on the entire layer. And of course you can turn that on and off. Switch to model mode. And you can also come up here and you can create a flood fill layer. So it's going to create a special layer that has all the UVs filled for what you've got selected. So that wasn't a very useful one because I think I had a selection there. So I'm just going to undo that. And I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to make sure I've got nothing selected. Edit, deselect all, and I'm going to create another flood fill layer. Then come up to layers and create a flood fill layer. Now you see it's automatically created a brand new layer with all the UVs filled. Just so that it gives you an idea, you can use this within Photoshop or other programs to kind of see where all the UVs are and what's filled up and what's not. Next we have a Bake AO layer. Now if I had a vertex map on here, it would turn that into its own Bake AO layer, ambient occlusion layer. So just to quickly test that, I'm going to come up to the character, the paint tool. I'm going to paint something on the model there. So now we have a vertex map. And with that selected, I'm going to choose Create Bake AO Layer. And what it's done is it's turned that into an actual texture that you can use. So it's turned that vertex painting into another texture. Under here we also have a few other options. Fill UV islands. This is going to fill all the UV islands on your model. Now this one here, you see it has two different islands. So when I use this option, it's going to choose a different color for each of these UV islands. It's not very useful with the way that I've got this mapped at the moment. But you'll see that each UV island has their own different color. Now these last two options here, the fill AO and the fill vertex map, are similar to the create bake AO layer. Now the fill AO, it's going to look for a vertex map called bake AO on your object, and that will let you flood filler onto your current selected layer. So if I had another layer selected, let's just reuse this dirt layer, and I right clicked in here and went, sorry, not right clicked, from the layers menu I chose fill AO. If that was called bake AO, it would bake it into this layer. Now it's just this kind of a special workflow, the bake AO, with the naming of bake AO. But what you can also do is if you have any vertex tag selected, then you can actually come a vertex map selected. You can come in here and go fill vertex map. It will do the same thing, but you just don't. If this one, you just don't have to have it selected. But here we'll go fill vertex map, and it's going to take that same vertex map and put it onto this currently selected dirt layer. So it just lets you take the texture from somewhere else. And you notice here it's done it on all of the dirt layers on every material as well. So instead of creating a brand new layer using this one up here, it just lets you put the detail where you want it. Okay, so that wraps up this layers menu here and some of the other features for working between these. Now with these views here, you can not only drag them from the content browser, you can also drag images in directly from your hard drive, and it'll map it into these and fill up the full texture space. So next I'm going to go over to the UDIM channel, because we've already covered this as well, and I'll get back to the UDIMs in a bit. Actually, I'll move to the standard material and just go over these two options here. Now to do that, I'm going to create another object and create a cube. And what this option under here does is it'll create a material per UV island. And this will create a material per polygon. So for this cube, the UV islands are all overlapping. And there's essentially a one for each face. But we want to just do one per polygon anyway, one for each of these polygons. So I'm just going to click material per polygon. And it's going to create 6 materials, one for each side of the cube. Let's just quickly put some textures in there so we have something to look at. And there's a few limits on this. So you don't want to do this accidentally, but if you did do it accidentally, it will actually warn you. It'll warn you, do you really want to be creating this many materials for this object? And the width and height of these, you'll see they're kind of sampled down a bit, is actually defined in the preferences. So we've got a per poly width and a per poly height. So these images here are actually 128 by 128. So they're very low resolution. So you can imagine if you ran this command on a sphere with many, many small polygons, then it would create a whole lot of small textures and a lot of materials as well. But if you're going to be doing this kind of thing with that option, it's a special use case where you might want to have multiple materials, a single material per object. As I said before, this one does it per UV island. So if you had a group of UVs here and a group of UVs there, and you ran that, it would separate them out into every UV island would have its own material with its own texture maps. So the UDIM does the same. Instead of creating a standard material, it'll create a UDIM. Now, the difference between a standard material and a UDIM is just where the UVs are in UV space. And if you're unsure what that means, then don't worry about it, really. If you're not using UDIMs, then you don't really need to worry about them. But if you are coming from a program that uses UDIMs, then please check out the UDIM workflow tutorial for 4D Paint, and that will explain how to bring in UDIMs and work with them. And that also is the setup UDIMs for object. But just to show this UDIM tab, I'm going to create UDIMs for this cube as well. Now here we have, it's just showing one because we've only got one on this object, because these aren't actually in UDIM space. This is actually UV space, so I am going to go over a little bit how this works. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3. Most UVs are between 0 and 1, 0 and 1. But with UDIMs, you have them between 0 and 1, and then you have another UDIM in between 1 and 2, another one between 2 and 3, and it goes up and across as well. We can't see that here because all these are mapped into the same space. They're all being drawn right here. So to create UDIM space, let me just clear all these. I'm going to create another cube. I'm going to rename this because the textures are created by name. And I'm going to run that create UDIM per polygon. Go back to the material view. Make sure I've got it selected first, and it's a polygon object. UDIM per polygon. So we've got the same thing as before. Got a bunch of materials, and I'm going to drag on some images onto here again. Let's choose something a bit more colourful. We can do better than those other ones. What's missing? What's missing? The balloon. Okay. Now if we switch, there's our object, and if we switch to the UDIM view, you're going to see the UDIMs are all laid out there. So the UVs are actually going across. So it's remapped this essentially to have a UDIM per polygon, and it's put them all, the UVs, all into their own UV space. You can't paint or anything in this view. This is pretty much just for viewing and analyzing at the moment, but we can add painting to this view later on if users require it. And speaking of painting, you can actually paint into this view, although at the moment there's no preview of the brush. So although I can have a brush selected and select the color, I can brush into this view if I select it on the layer view. Let's select the background layer. So you can paint in there, and this paint is actually in pixel size. Just the amount of pixels that it's going to be. And this does work with stamps as well. So let me just bring up that content view again. And I'll right click and use as stamp. Oops, I didn't need to minimize that. And when I click, I put little pumpkins down. And I can also bring up the size of those. 50 pixels, 50 pixel pumpkins. So we will improve this as well in the future and add more painting abilities, especially the cursor, which is obviously required. But that's just to show that you can actually use this if you need to. Okay, so that covers these ones. Now we have a special kind of option here, select edges. Now this is just for times where you want to select the outside boundaries of your UVs. So let me just create a sphere here. I'm just going to very quickly UV map this sphere. See how I've just quickly remapped that object. Now if you don't see the UVs showing up sometimes after remapping, I think you just need to uncheck that and recheck it, and the UVs will show up. And now just to show the option, so you can option click in here when you're in polygon mode, you can option click to select these, and you can option shift click to add them. And while I'm here, I might as well show the option of a UDIM per UV island. And there you see a UDIM per UV island, and you've got the UDIMs will show up in here as well. And the option I wanted to show was the select edges. So if I go select edges, it's going to select all the polygons around the edges of this model on each of the materials. And if you switch to line mode and do the same thing, it's going to select the edges, but of course they won't show up in here because we're in line mode. And if you're in point mode and you do the same thing, it's going to select the points. But in polygon mode, you'll actually see them in this view. And that has uses in certain workflows. The last two options we have here are Fill Sculpt Layer and Fill Sculpt Mask. To demonstrate the sculpting options, I've just switched to the sculpting layout. I'm going to create myself a sphere and subdivide it a few times. And then I'm going to grab the grab brush and just pull out some sections of this model. And now I'm going to add a material to it. And then from the menu, I'm going to choose Fill Sculpt Layer. You can see here that it's taken the sculpting detail and normalized it between 0 and 1 and applied it to this layer. You can do the same thing with the mask. So I'm just going to click undo there, and I'm going to grab a mask and paint a mask onto this object. And from sculpting, Fill Sculpt Mask. It's going to fill this with the mask detail that I just painted. And just lastly, I also wanted to show that you can actually put this detail into the body paint masks as well. So if we bring up the Show Layer Manager for this, and this is the body paint system, right click and go Add Layer Mask. I'm going to click on this mask here, and that's going to be displayed over here as well. So now I can go Fill Sculpt Mask, and let's put that detail into the actual mask as well. So you can take this detail from sculpting and you can put it into a mask channel and use that to make sure that you don't sculpt or paint over a certain area of your object to preserve certain detail. I'm not going to go over this any further in this video, but if you do want more information on that particular workflow using these painting tools, particularly these options with the sculpting, then head over to the Polygons 40.com and go to the Bundles 40 Paint, and then in the Material view, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a painting and sculpting workflows. So this is an older video at the moment, but we may update this, and this goes through these kind of workflows in more details. And here you can see how it's used the sculpting detail to restrict where this paint goes and able to paint into these cavity maps using that workflow. Okay, that's all from today. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope to show you more features soon. Thanks.